My name is Evelyn, I'm 34, and right now I feel exposed, cornered, like everyone is laughing at me behind a glass wall. That night, my daughter-in-law Marissa turned on the projector, filling the room with embarrassing images of my life, childhood blunders, awkward moments, everything she thought would humiliate me in front of my family. I could feel my face burning, my heart racing, and for a moment, I wondered if I should just vanish. But then I remembered something crucial. I'm a chess player, a strategist, someone who's spent years thinking 3 moves ahead. They threw me out the night before my graduation, so I bought a one-way ticket and never looked back. The moment Marissa clicked on the projector, I felt a jolt like electricity running down my spine. The first image flashed across the screen, me, 10 years old, standing on a makeshift stage at a family reunion, tripping over my own feet while trying to perform a dance routine. The room erupted in nervous laughter. I forced a small smile, pretending to brush it off, but inside, my chest tightened and my stomach twisted. My father's eyes darted toward me, worried, but my mother, ever the silent observer, simply pursed her lips. Marissa's smirk widened, a predator satisfied with the first blood drawn. I could almost hear her thinking, let's see her squirm. I took a slow breath, letting the air fill my lungs before exhaling carefully. I could feel my hands twitching under the table, but I told myself to stay still, to observe. Chess had taught me patience in ways life hadn't. Every move mattered. Every reaction counted. I had played countless games alone in my bedroom, late into the night, imagining opponents in my head, reading their intentions before they made them. And in that moment, the family room became my board. She advanced. Another image appeared, a cooking disaster. A cake collapsed mid-bake, flour on my cheeks, eyes wide in panic. Laughter rang out again, louder this time, more intentional. I could feel the flush creeping up my neck. My stomach churned. Part of me wanted to bolt, to retreat into the quiet solace of my room and pretend none of this existed. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was too much at stake. Not the embarrassment itself, but the subtle assertion of control Marissa wanted to claim over me. I closed my eyes for a moment, and the memory of my teenage years came rushing back. Nights spent in the dim glow of my desk lamp, pieces of a chessboard scattered across the table, my mind racing through openings and defenses while the rest of the world slept. I remembered the pride of defeating older players at tournaments, the exhilaration of watching an opponent falter under my strategy. That feeling, that calm control, had been my anchor all these years. If I could summon even a fraction of it now, I could survive this night. The projector flicked again. Marissa had prepared a slideshow of family trivia questions, subtle in their cruelty. "Remember when Evelyn tried to make lasagna for the first time?" she asked, voice dripping with fake sweetness. She paused for dramatic effect, looking around the table, burned the noodles, set off the smoke alarm, and somehow spilled tomato sauce on the ceiling. Laughter rippled through the room. My lips curved in a forced grin. My heart thumped, but I allowed my mind to drift into analysis. In chess, I knew how to respond when an opponent tried to bait me into reactionary moves. The key was not to attack blindly, but to anticipate and redirect. I noticed the shifts in the room. My sister-in-law trying not to laugh, my nephew's curious gaze, my mother's silent worry. They were all pieces in a larger pattern, and I needed to understand their positions before making my move. I waited for the next question, letting silence stretch, letting tension build. When Marissa's gaze locked on mine, triumphant, I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled, just enough to suggest amusement rather than defeat. The next image flashed, a childhood recital where I had frozen mid-song, forgetting the lyrics completely. Gasps of delight and ridicule collided in the air. The projector hum seemed deafening, amplifying every whispered giggle. I felt the familiar pang of shame, but I also felt something else. Anger. Not reckless anger, but focused, refined. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was a challenge. And I had always excelled at challenges. I remembered my first real chess tournament. I had been 12, facing players twice my age, underestimated because I was small, quiet, a girl with glasses too big for my face and braids that bounced as I moved. They laughed at my timid voice, my nervous smiles, the way I adjusted my sleeves before each turn. But by the final match, I had them cornered. Every opening I had studied, every tactic I had memorized, every trap I had anticipated came together perfectly. Victory wasn't loud or arrogant. It was quiet, inevitable, earned move by move. I realized then that this moment with Marissa was my tournament. Each embarrassing image, each pointed remark was a move on the board. And I wasn't about to lose. I started responding with small, calculated gestures, light teasing, subtle corrections to her facts, observations that revealed knowledge and insight she hadn't expected. The energy in the room shifted imperceptibly. The laughter that had felt like daggers softened, a little, as family members began noticing that something about me wasn't as it seemed. My mind drifted further back to the countless nights alone, replaying games in my head, imagining victory, imagining the moment of quiet recognition when a carefully planned strategy revealed itself. I let that memory fuel me. I answered her next question calmly, not with defensiveness, but with a mix of humor and intelligence. Actually, I burned the noodles on purpose, I said lightly, and the room froze for a fraction of a second before laughter erupted, this time at the audacity rather than mockery. Marissa blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't anticipated that kind of response. By the time the projector dimmed, I could feel the subtle victory settling in. I hadn't humiliated Marissa back. I hadn't needed to. I had used strategy, patience, and the quiet power of observation, the very tools that had shaped me as a chess player, to reclaim the room. My chest rose and fell, slower now, steadier. The night was far from over, but the first move had been mine, and I was ready for the next. As the projector clicked off and the last murmurs of laughter faded, I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and exhaustion. The room looked the same, warm lights, familiar furniture, family gathered around, but everything had shifted. Marissa sat back, smug, thinking she had won some invisible victory, while I quietly measured every face, every movement, every subtle shift in energy. It was like staring at a chessboard mid-game, each piece waiting for its next move. And I was ready. Dinner began, and the conversation tried to steer back to mundane topics. Weather, work, vacations. But I could feel the undercurrent of tension, like a faint electric current brushing against my skin. Marissa injected sly comments, small digs that might have gone unnoticed to anyone else, but I felt them. She asked pointed questions about my career, about my hobbies, about the so-called failures of my past, carefully phrased to draw embarrassment. I sipped my water, keeping my calm, letting the words slide off me like rain, all the while planning my response. I remembered a moment from my childhood when I had faced my first truly intimidating opponent in a chess tournament. I was 10, nervous, palms sweating as he smirked and moved his pieces with calculated precision. I lost that game, but not because I was unskilled. I lost because I let fear dictate my moves, reacting instead of thinking ahead. That memory hit me now like a jolt. Fear was exactly what Marissa wanted, and I wasn't going to give it to her. As the meal progressed, Marissa's attempts became bolder. She leaned close to my son, whispering stories about funny things Mom did, painting me as clumsy, naive, outdated. I felt a flicker of anger, a rush of protective fire, but I remembered the board. Every move I made had to count. I smiled softly at my son, who looked briefly confused, then subtly redirected the conversation with an anecdote from my work that showcased both competence and humor. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Marissa's smirk faltered for just a moment. Later, she tried another tactic, projecting a video of a family talent show from years ago. I was singing, off-key, clearly nervous, flailing in front of a crowd. My stomach twisted, a familiar wave of embarrassment threatening to drown me. But I forced myself to breathe deeply, letting the memory transform. I remembered the thrill of that performance, the courage it had taken to step on stage despite shaking knees. My eyes softened with a kind of quiet pride as I said, I still sing off-key sometimes, but at least I never stopped trying. The room froze for a heartbeat, then laughter erupted, not at me, but with an unexpected warmth. Marissa's eyes narrowed, calculating, and I realized she hadn't expected resilience. Flashbacks flooded in as I sat there, moments from my teenage years when I had stayed up all night solving chess problems, imagining worlds where every move mattered. I thought about tournaments where I had been underestimated, laughed at, dismissed. And yet, I had learned to turn every slight, every underestimation, into advantage. That skill had been forged in quiet determination, in hours of solitary practice, in the patience of thinking 3 moves ahead. And now, in this living room, years later, it was exactly what I needed. The tension escalated further when Marissa pulled out a family quiz she had prepared, designed specifically to trip me up with obscure questions about relatives, traditions, and events I wasn't expected to remember. She smiled sweetly, a predator hiding behind charm. "Let's see how well you really know your family," she said. I nodded, pretending calm, but inside, I was fully alert. Every question was a challenge, yes, but also an opportunity. I answered carefully, mixing humor, insight, and honesty. My responses didn't just deflect the embarrassment. They subtly revealed knowledge and presence of mind that no projector could capture. At one point, she asked about a small family story that I had never been part of. I hesitated, letting the silence stretch just long enough to create tension, then smiled and said, "I remember it differently, and here's why." I told a story that was accurate but also framed it in a way that made my perspective seem valuable, clever, and unexpected. The room shifted again. Family members leaned in, intrigued rather than mocking. Marissa's strategy was being slowly dismantled, not with confrontation, but with careful, deliberate presence. Later, while everyone moved to dessert, I noticed Marissa trying to corner me again, this time with a friendly challenge, a puzzle she had printed, hoping to prove me incapable of solving it. My pulse quickened, but I knelt over the paper with deliberate focus, letting my fingers hover above the pieces. The puzzle was complex, meant to be embarrassing if I failed. But I remembered nights spent alone, moving chess pieces over imagined boards, calculating several moves ahead. I solved it methodically, deliberately, and when I looked up, I saw the surprise and, faintly, the frustration in her eyes. A quiet victory. By the time the night ended, I felt drained yet invigorated. Every humiliation had been countered, every subtle attack transformed into a demonstration of strategy, patience, and quiet dominance. Marissa had tried to control the narrative, to assert superiority, but I had shifted the energy in the room without ever raising my voice, without resorting to anger or ridicule. It was a slow, meticulous victory, but the kind that lasts. As I lay in bed later that night, reflecting on the events, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because I had survived her attempts to embarrass me, but because I had proven to myself that my years of patience, study, and self-discipline were not just for chessboards, they were for life. Every humiliation, every small act of cruelty had been a move in a larger game. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely in control. I closed my eyes and let the night wash over me, knowing the battles weren't over, but confident that I had the skill, the patience, and the quiet strength to face whatever came next. I had learned that true power is never loud. It's subtle, it's deliberate, and it can't be captured on film or projected onto a screen. The days after that night felt strangely tense, like the calm before a storm. I could feel Marissa watching me from across the room during family gatherings, measuring, calculating, waiting for her next move. It was subtle, her smiles, the slight tilt of her head, the casual way she referenced things she knew would unsettle me, but I sensed it all. Every gesture became a part of a larger pattern, a web she was spinning to make me feel small. I reminded myself of the chessboard again. Anticipation was everything, patience even more. I couldn't let her dictate the rhythm of my life, not here, not now. I began to notice how she worked on the people around her, planting doubts and subtle critiques, a whisper here, a casual comment there. It wasn't overt, but it was designed to isolate me in the room, to make me feel like an outsider. The first time I recognized it, I felt a flash of panic. My chest tightened and my fingers clenched. But then I remembered that feeling of quiet victory from the previous night. I had survived her first assault. Now it was time to plan. I needed to study her the way I studied opponents in chess: patterns, weaknesses, predictable habits. A week later, she orchestrated a more public challenge. Our extended family was gathered for Sunday brunch, and Marissa had prepared a friendly competition, an intellectual challenge, designed to expose my weaknesses in logic and memory. I walked into the room, aware of her gaze following me, sizing me up like a predator circling its prey. I felt the familiar mix of anxiety and adrenaline, but I focused on my breathing, grounding myself in the rhythm of preparation. Chess had taught me that clarity came from focus, not panic. The questions began, each one a subtle trap. Marissa framed them casually, sprinkling in family anecdotes, cultural references, and obscure trivia. Each was meant to make me stumble, to force me to appear forgetful or ignorant. The room watched, smiling, laughing softly at the tension that had begun to creep in. But I approached each question like a puzzle on the board. I paused, considered every angle, every implication, every possible reaction. I answered with careful precision, sometimes deflecting with humor, sometimes providing insight that no one expected. Midway through, she attempted a more personal strike, asking about my early days in my career, painting my choices as naive and impulsive. I felt the old familiar sting of embarrassment, a quick flash of self-doubt, but it was fleeting. I recalled nights in my small apartment, working late into the night, analyzing games, making sacrifices, choosing paths that no one else had understood. Those years had built me into someone resilient, someone who could think 3 steps ahead. I let that memory fortify me. I smiled at her, answered honestly but with dignity, and the room shifted. Some family members exchanged glances, recognition dawning in their eyes. The tension escalated further when Marissa tried a direct confrontation. She leaned across the table, voice low but sharp, and said, "You've always thought you were smarter than everyone, haven't you?" My heart skipped a beat. The words cut deeper than any slideshow or trivia question could. But I stayed still, inhaled, and responded with calm precision. I've always believed in understanding the board before making a move. That's all. Silence followed. The audacity of my response surprised her, but it also gave me a subtle, internal thrill. I realized she had underestimated my ability to remain composed under pressure. As the day progressed, small victories began to accumulate. I noticed the cracks in her strategy, moments where she overreached, assuming control over conversations, assuming I would react impulsively. Each time, I responded with careful timing, letting her aggression expose itself while maintaining my own presence. I began to see the larger pattern. She thrived on others' reactions, on exploiting fear or embarrassment. And if I could remain steady, observant, deliberate, her power would diminish. Flashbacks came unbidden, pulling me back to my teenage years. Alone in my room, pieces of a chessboard spread around me. I remembered hours of quiet study, losing and winning, learning the value of patience, the thrill of anticipation, the subtle art of psychological pressure. Those nights had been solitary, yes, but they had forged a strength that now coursed through me like a current. Every move Marissa made could be met with strategy, every jab countered by foresight. I realized that this wasn't just about defending myself. It was about mastering the game, the dynamic, and ultimately myself. By evening, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on me, but also a quiet exhilaration. I had held my ground, navigated her manipulations, and subtly turned situations in my favor without anyone needing to know the battles I had fought internally. Marissa had tried to assert dominance, to embarrass and belittle me, but she had failed to break the one thing that no slideshow, no whisper, no trap could ever touch: my self-possession. As I lay awake that night, I reflected on the subtle lessons of the day. Each confrontation had been a test of observation, patience, and strategic thinking. Every flash of embarrassment, every sly comment, Every calculated dig from Marissa was an opportunity to demonstrate mastery over the situation without anger, without loud confrontation. The parallels with chess were undeniable. The importance of foresight, the value of patience, the power of thinking several moves ahead. For the first time, I understood something profound. Life's challenges were not won with brute force, but with strategy, observation, and timing. Marissa had forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, yes, but in doing so, she had inadvertently strengthened me. I wasn't just surviving her attacks anymore, I was beginning to anticipate them, to shape the board in my favor. And that realization, quiet and powerful, was the true victory of the day. The next family gathering arrived like a storm I could feel on the horizon. Marissa had clearly spent days planning her moves, subtle and deliberate, the way a grandmaster sets up a trap. I could sense her energy the moment I walked in, the confident tilt of her head, the quiet smirk, the glimmer in her eyes that said she expected me to falter. I let myself breathe, centering on the rhythm of strategy, the lessons learned in countless hours alone over chessboards. This wasn't just a family dinner, it was a battlefield, and I was ready. She began immediately, weaving small jabs into casual conversation, her voice soft, honeyed, but sharp. "Remember when Evelyn tried to organize the charity event?" she said, glancing around. Well, it didn't exactly go as planned." The room tittered politely, some smiles concealing discomfort. My heart raced, but I focused on observation rather than reaction. I noticed patterns in her approach, her timing, the way she exaggerated just enough to get a reaction, the reliance on others' validation. Each detail became a clue, a key to her strategy. I responded with quiet confidence. "Yes, it was chaotic," I said, smiling warmly. "But we raised more than expected and learned a lot along the way." My words were simple, but deliberate, acknowledging the past without allowing her to weaponize it. I could see her pause, just a flicker, a hesitation she didn't intend to show. That hesitation was my opening. I let it linger. Throughout the evening, she tried again and again. Subtle critiques, whispered insinuations, comparisons meant to embarrass me. And every time, I met her with calm, measured responses, often blending humor with insight. I shared small personal stories, reflections on past mistakes that highlighted growth rather than failure, turning the room's attention from mockery to admiration. I realized the family was slowly beginning to notice the shift. Marissa's smirk faltered, her energy tense, defensive. At one point, she brought out a puzzle she had designed to test my intellect in front of everyone. I knelt over it, examining the pieces, feeling the familiar surge of focus. My mind drifted to the countless nights alone, analyzing chess strategies, visualizing complex games. Each move, each possibility, had been rehearsed 1,000 times in my mind. I solved it methodically, deliberately, and when I looked up, the surprise in her eyes was unmistakable. Quiet triumph settled in my chest, a warm, satisfying glow. But the real battle wasn't in the puzzles or the trivia. It was in the subtle, psychological exchanges, the side glances, the whispered remarks, the undercurrents that Marissa relied on to assert control. I began to anticipate her maneuvers before she made them, redirecting conversations, creating openings for others to share insights that highlighted my presence, and gradually reclaiming the energy of the room. Every small victory fed into a larger pattern. I was no longer reacting, I was leading. Flashbacks swept through me again. The teenage girl hunched over a chessboard, the silent hours of practice, the nervous excitement of tournaments, the thrill of mastering opponents who underestimated me. Those nights had forged not just skill, but patience, resilience, and self-confidence. I realized that every humiliation Marissa had attempted was now being transformed into a platform for demonstration, not of arrogance, but of quiet, undeniable confidence. The turning point came during a conversation about family achievements. Marissa tried to redirect attention to highlight my missteps, smirking as she recounted minor blunders. I paused, allowing the silence to stretch, then shared a story of a project I had led years ago, a project no one had expected me to succeed at. I spoke with humility, honesty, and warmth, letting the room absorb not just the facts, but the confidence behind them. Eyes widened, heads nodded. I had subtly revealed mastery without confrontation, and in doing so, the balance shifted irreversibly. By the end of the evening, the tension had transformed. Marissa's energy, once predatory and dominant, had dulled. She no longer controlled the narrative, the room, or the conversation. I felt a profound sense of calm and clarity, the understanding that true power is never loud or humiliating. It's deliberate, patient, and internal. I had turned every attempt to undermine me into evidence of my own resilience and strategy. Later, alone in my room, I reflected on the journey. The shame, the embarrassment, the subtle attacks, they had all been lessons preparing me for this moment. I realized that life, like chess, rewards patience, foresight, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. The victories that matter most are not flashy or loud. They are quiet, deliberate, and deeply personal. And in that realization, I felt whole, empowered, and profoundly at peace. Marissa had tried to use projection and humiliation as a weapon, but she had underestimated the depth of my preparation, the strength of my patience, and the quiet power I had cultivated over years. I understood finally that true mastery is not about defeating someone else. It's about knowing yourself, understanding your own strengths, and moving through the world with deliberate confidence. That night, I didn't just win a family battle. I reclaimed my sense of self, my dignity, and my place in the room. As I closed my eyes, I smiled, feeling a calm that came not from the absence of challenge, but from knowing I had faced it, understood it, and emerged stronger. The lesson was clear. Real power is quiet, internal, and cannot be projected onto a screen or manipulated through humiliation. It is lived, practiced, and embodied in every deliberate, thoughtful move we make.